Daled 4b on the bottom. It's 5 lines from the bottom. It starts with Amar Rava. Rava also says Chamisha Lavan Amurim B'dam Lama. Why does it say 5 times the prohibition of blood? Achas Adam Chulin. One is telling me blood that's not a carbon. You're not allowed to eat. Daled Amid Bais. Just a few lines on the bottom. One is for Dam Chulin. Achas Dam Kachim. One is the prohibition of blood from a sacrifice. Achas Dam Kisei. One is the prohibition of blood that was covered already but got uncovered, because you have a mitzvah to cover the blood. Achas Dam Ivarim. One is the prohibition of the blood that's in the limbs, in the meat that needs to be extracted if it's going to be cooked, and it's going to go out. And Achas Dam Atamtis. And one is for the blood that flows out after the animal has already died. Amar Rabbi Eily. Rabbi Eily says, Achal meiser dagan v'tiresh v'yitzar. If someone eats the meiser, it's supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim. It's meiser sheni. And he eats the meiser from the grain. I don't know where he is, Rabbi Eily. Sure. The grain, the wine and the oil. It says in the pasuk, those are the three things that Meiser is from. So like a shalish, he gets malchus for each one of these. I think my asks for like an alav shebachlalas. 1 second. That's a general prohibition. It says leisucha le'achlam. You're not allowed to eat them. It says one pasuk, which is referring to 3 things. One pasuk referring to more than one thing. More than one prohibition is considered lav shebachlalos, and there's no malchus for that. Where it says shani hachadam yaisir krai, this is different because it's an extra pasuk. The extra pasuk is teaching me that there's malchus anyway. It says mechti. Let's see. Pasuk says that you should eat in front of Hashem your God the tithe of the grain, the wine, and the oil. What does it mean before you, God? That means in Yerushalayim. It means inside the walls, yes, but outside, no. So, why does it then have to repeat? It says you're not allowed to eat in your cities, in your gates. The meiser of your grain, your wine, and the oil. Why do we need that? We already said where to eat it, inside. It says, it must be l'chalik. Dividing it up to tell me that if I eat all 3, grain, wine, and oil, I get malchus for each one. Gemara says, Imahi, 1 second, that's not so clear, because maybe it's only telling me that there's a positive command where to eat it. But maybe it's not telling me that there's a lav, because which pasuk was the one that's extra? So kas rachmana leisuchal, it says leisuchal lokme balav. It says leisuchal, that tells me that it's a negative prohibition. But it's still general. Could have said don't eat them with the pronoun, plural pronoun. Why did it have to itemize it? The Yechudei Achila, the Kol Chad V'Chad. It's coming to tell me that
each one's a
Yechudei. That's probably the way it's supposed to be. Is that how you have it? No, it's not. Yechudei Achila Kol Chad V'Chad. To give a specific prohibition of eating each one.
But Meiser Sheni is much more than these 3 examples, isn't it?
Yeah. Meiser Sheni is no, Bikurim is the 7th species. This is Meiser Sheni.
This is all that's covered.
Yeah, the grains.
Wine
It may be rabbinic. Maybe other things that are rabbinic.
Because this would mean that grains, yes, but grapes, no.
No, Tirosh.
Tirosh is wine.
It's wine. But wine and grapes would be under the same
the
thing,
fruit of
even
the grape.
Yeah. It lists that because that's the main product of the grapevine. Okay. We're on top of Hey. Hey Amar Aleph. 4 lines down. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Ka'eicha lechem kali v'karma like gimel. We're talking about before the Omer is brought on the 15th, on the 16th of Nisan, you have to bring the Eimer. Before that, you're not allowed to eat the new grain. You have to finish all the old grain before you start the new one. But that's not the actual law. Just there's a time that you need to wait until you can eat the new grain.
Is that the same as Yashan, or it's
Exactly.
it is?
So it says in the verse, bread, toasted grains, and also fresh grains, kali and caramel. If you eat all three, you get 3 lashes. Mar asks the same question that we asked before. There's no malchus for general prohibitions. The same answer that we gave before. We have a verse that makes it extra. The pasuk really only needs to say bread. And we would be able to know the other ones. Very good, it's extra. And that's why you get malchus for all 3. The Gemara says, 1 second.
How would you know grapes from bread?
Not grapes, the toasted grain and fresh grain. Gemara says, 1 second, you won't know that either because I would say the bread has the laws of challah. That's why you have to wait. In other words, we have to get all the variables to be the same to be able to learn it out. Others will say there's other factors here that are making it prohibitive. Nichtav kali, so we'll try differently. Write the toasted grain, and don't write the bread. And we'll say, we'll understand the bread from the toasted grain. Menelef mikali, and we'll learn it from that. It says lechem mikali layasi. You can't learn bread from toasted grain. Mishum dekali yisabeine. We would say that that's unprocessed. It's the original grain. Bread is already processed.
Do you think Rice Krispies are?
It's processed. It's a different item. So, natural flavorings. So it says lechem lo isa be'ene, but that's lechem is not the original product. Okay, so let's try this. Caramel. What about now it says caramel mikali layasi. You won't be able to learn the fresh grain from the toasted grain. Mishum dekali nisrabe etzel menachem. Because I have one of the meal offerings is actually toasted grain. That's the omer itself. It's made from toasted grain. They put it into a pipe that had holes in it, and they would put it over the fire. They would toast it like that. So it was toasted grains, and that's why it has the laws of not to eat it.
It's a great idea for popcorn at a campfire.
Put it in a tube, in a
Gotta figure out what kind of tube, metal tube.
burst at the ends. So caramel, but caramel, the fresh grain doesn't. There's no menacha that's brought from the fresh grain. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: nichtav caramel. So write fresh grain. You're not allowed to eat before the Omer. And v'neilef lechem v'kali minei, and we'll learn bread and toasted grain from it. So zikla mifrach, that's a problem as well because mala caramel shkin leinishtana mibriase. Caramel is not just the original item, but it's the original item that hasn't even been changed. It's totally fresh. Min chad le'alfi, we can't learn from one of them, but neilef chadam min train, we'll learn one from 2. Lei nichtav kra lechem, don't write bread. Neilef mikali v'karmel, and we'll learn from the toasted and the fresh grain. Gemara says that's a problem because ikla mifrach malakali v'karmel disna beinayin. Kali and caramel, toasted and fresh grain, is still in its original form. So okay, so lei nichtav kra karmel v'neilef milechem mikali. Here we're already getting somewhere. Don't write the fresh grain, and we'll learn it from the bread and from the toasted grain. It says ikla mifrach malachem mikalishkin srabe etzem menachas. That's no good because those 2 items have menachas, bread and toasted grain. Those are both menachas. Caramel is not a menacha. So we'd say that we won't include the caramel from there. Amalach Rabbi Yitzchak will respond. Rabbi Yitzchak was the one that started this. That says that you get malchus 3 times. He could respond, Lei nichtav kra kali. Don't write the toasted grain. Menelef Menachem caramel, and we could learn it from bread and fresh grain. My perchas. What could you ask on this? You have it perfect. I perchas mal lechem shkin esrabet el chala If you're going to say that bread has the laws of challah, that's why it has this. That's the factor that makes it the prohibition of eating it before the Omer. Karmel yechiach. There's no challah from just grain, fresh grain. Imishum the karmel leinishtana mibriasa. If you're going to say, well, karmel is special, it has these laws because it's in its original form. Lechem yechiach. So the bread will show you that it's not in the original form and it still has these laws. Hilkach leika, the biyaser. That's why you get malchus, because kali is not necessary for it to say it. The Gemara says, 1 second. You only have kali that's extra. Ve'ema kali de miyaser mechayev chada. Kali, if you eat the toasted grain before the Omer, you get malchus once. Akulu mechayev chada, but if you eat bread and caramel together, you're also chayev once.
Excuse me, how did we get into all this?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The rabbis had very short attention
I'm
spans.
curious, what?
It's a good
Started
question.
over here
What's
with-
happening is we're
We were dealing with numbers.
we're dealing with
And
numbers of how many
specific.
times you get malchus for different things or punishments for different things.
Okay, thank you.
That's what it was.
So today we started with blood, but yesterday we were dealing with fat as well.
And that question is some of the Sikhs also. You're in the middle of it. You're like, how did I get here?
Wie kriegt men arais, right? Okay, so the question here was, this Ganav he climbs through the chimney, and he comes down and he falls. He's right in the rabbi's study. So the rabbi says, "What are you doing here?" So he says, "I have a shaila." So he says, "What's the shaila?" He says, "Wie kriegt men arais from the? How do I get out of here?" Okay, so we could think that maybe there's 3 items and there's malchus only twice, because one of them is the one that we're going to learn out, but the other 2 we would have to say it. So imkein nichtav kra lechem carmel v'kali. The order of writing this, tells us the significance that it's all 3. Why? Inami nichtav kali v'lechem v'karmel. It could say either bread, fresh grain, toasted grain, or toasted grain, bread, and fresh grain. Amai kasav l'kali b'emta. Why did it put the toasted grain in the center? This is what it means. Lechem b'kali nechayev, b'karmel nechayev b'kali. Or kikali, it's supposed to be probably. Just bread has its own lashes, just like toasted grain, and caramel also has its own lashes, just like toasted grain. I want to do a comparison that just like the toasted grain, which is not necessary for it to cite in this, because I could have understood that on its own, that gets malchus on its own. So too, the bread gets malchus like kali, and caramel gets malchus like kali individually. That means all 3. The fact that I put it in the center. The center is doing this comparison to what's before and what's after it. This problem. I'm making worksheets for my students, so I have Hebrew lines from the Gemara. That's really, I like to break it up with a comma. So it's like phrases. I break up the clauses into phrases. The problem is that some of them there's no comma there, and I have like a sukkah that is higher above 20 amas. That's sukkah shikavay amas. So, do I say a sukkah, comma, that is higher, comma, or a sukkah that is higher, comma. So here, we're putting commas on both ends. So we have the lechem that's compared to the kali. We have the kali that's compared to the Amar Rabbi Yanai. The commentary here says that it's not Rabbi Yanai. But anyway. Don't take lightly a gzeir shava. Gzeir shava is similar words, a verbal analogy. It says a word here and it says the same word there, the same law that it says there, that applies to here. Right?
A unique word.
Yeah.
Why?
It could be sham.
Lots of words that are
No, it could be sham. There's some words that are even not so unique, but it said it there.
Sometimes.
Okay, why? Shere pigel echad migufei Torah. Pigel is a very important law in the Torah. It has kares. Pigel is if someone brings a sacrifice and his intention is to eat the sacrifice or sprinkle the blood after the appropriate time. The whole way that we know that law is just from Gzeir Shava. Dam Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says that's why they don't think it's Rabbi Yanai, because Rabbi Yochanan is a student of Rabbi Yanai. They wouldn't be quoting Rabbi Yanai and then say, as Rabbi Yochanan says. The Tani Zavda Bar Levi. Zavda Bar Levi said, they ask over here also that we have this Gemara in other places without Zavda Bar Levi. Nermal Alan. It says over there, it says it's really by Neisar. V'nemar kan, and it says over here, the one that eats it carries his sin. And it says over here, the soul that eats it, eats from it, carries his sin. Malahalan karis, just like by Neisar, the rule is karis. So Afghan karis, the rule by Pigel is also karis. We're comparing Parshas Kedoshim Tiyu to Parshas Tzav. Amar Rab Simai. Simai says, "La'ilam al tikzer shavakala beinecha." The same thing. Gzer shava should not be light in your eyes. Why? B'sharei noiser echan migufei Torah. Noiser itself is gufei Torah. La'ilim dakasav elam gzer shava, and even that we only know from gzer shava. Why? Maihi. What is that? Yalef kodesh kodesh. We learn kodesh kodesh. It says va'ich lavavayni yisaki es kodesh shem chilal. One place it says that the one that eats it carries his sin because he's profaned the holies of God. It also says that you burn the nicer in fire, that it's holy. Okay. Now the truth is, apparently in our first law, it seemed to think that that was nicer without any Kodesh Hashem or Ki Kodesh. We thought that we were learning Pigel from nicer. And now we're saying, oh, nicer itself we don't know. So really, that over there could have been Chuslam Kaimai. Okay. When you read through those psukim, you'll see it. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, "La'ilam al tikzer shava kala beinecha." Gzer shava should not be light in your eyes. This is our third example of this. Why? Someone that lives with his daughter, but it's not his wife's daughter. It's his daughter from a girl that he raped out of marriage. So, and we only know this, that there's sreifa, that this is a punishment deserving of being burnt from Gzer Shaved. Amar Rava Amar li Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abdimi. Rava says, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abdimi said this to me. Asya heina heina lisura, asya zina zima l'sreifa. We learn the prohibition from heina, the word heina, and we learn the punishment from zima.
Aren't there limitations on learning Einesh from these logical deductions?
Ah, very good. From a Kal V'chaimer.
Not from
Gzer Shava. Yeah.
We said that previously.
Yeah, Kal V'chaimer, we had a problem. And we actually, in this law itself, we're not going to use the Kal V'chaimer. It's it's interesting here. We have the rule that a person cannot marry, it says clearly in Torah, can't marry a woman and her daughter. That would mean either a woman and her daughter, or it would mean a wife and her mother, because that's also a woman and her daughter. And his mother-in-law, okay? So that's clear. Then we have a verse that says, from all things, that's the good. Okay, then we have another verse that says that he can't marry his granddaughter or his great-granddaughter from someone that he raped, or someone that's out of marriage, not from his wife. But it left out a daughter from that. So the Gemara says, one second, but that could be a Kal V'chaimer. If he can't marry his granddaughter, who's further away from him, for sure he can't marry his daughter. He says, yeah, but we can't learn from a Kal V'chaimer. So we need to learn from this Gzer Shava. In the Gzer Shava it says Heina Heina. Over here it says Heina. Over there it says Heina. by the married woman and her daughter, it says Heina. Over there, it's a daughter. Over here, it also says Heina. And then it says Zima. Zima means that there's Sreifa. Over there, it says by one place Zima. It's like incest or something. So also over here, it says Zima. So that teaches us that the punishment is Sreifa.
Of course, Hena, these are not exactly unusual words.
They're not unusual, right? Those are pronouns.
Yeah.
That's not much an unusual word, but it's an extra word or out of place word, like it belongs there. There's lots of words in Torah that are we have a word here and a word there. We don't learn from them. It has to be something out of. It has to be something extra, something out of place.
Let's test that as we go through the next cycle.
Okay.
Find if they're really out of place.
It has to be an extra word that you can't just. There's lots of generic words that are all over here. We don't learn from them.
Well, we don't learn Gezerah Shav at all on our own.
Okay, that no one ever learned a word, anything specific from them. Lots of common words in
we
Torah
have
all
to
over the place.
we have to have the tradition. You and I can't say, "Oh, we found a new Gezerah Shav."
The Gemara has lots of words that are common throughout Torah. The Gemara doesn't learn anything from those specific words.
Right.
They're found in 10 different places.
I think that every word we do learn something from it. The question is, are we learning it from halacha in the Gemara, or are we learning something? Is there some other significance?
There's lots of words that are commonly found in Torah that no halacha in Gemara learned from it.
Okay. Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, "Alti gzeir shava kala b'nach. Gzeir shava should not be light in your eyes. Shein skolin hinin gufi terev le'lim da terev gzeir shava." People that the punishment is stoning. That we only know from gzeir shava. The Tanya was taught in the Bais nemerkan demeim bam. Over here it says demeim bam. By the other forbidden marriages. Nemar ba'iv v'yidaini demeim bam, and it says by that type of sorcery. That the May and Bum, their blood is in them. That means that they get the death penalty. What type of death penalty? Stoning. Malahalam beskila, afkam beskila. Just like over there, the May and Bum means skila. Also over here, the May and Bum means skila. And that halacha is we only know from Gzeir Shava.
I'm sorry, can I digress just a second? Yes or no?
Go on.
Last night in Yaakov, we were learning about why segulas are allowed, whereas what do you call it, nachash is not allowed.
Are you in Chulin?
In Yaakov, wherever.
Yeah.
I have no idea, you know. And I kept on thinking, I really didn't understand why. Oh, that's okay, you know. That's if this goes in front of me, but you can't say if this. I'm not sure I understand the difference between a skula and these incantations or, you know, black magic. I mean, you could save it for another time.
Yeah.
But,
there's a very good skula though. If your tea is very hot and you want it to cool down,
talk about it later.
You say chapter 119 in Tehillim. Okay.
Next year you can have plenty of tea.
Okay. Mafatim es Hashemen.
Oh, that's good.
If you make the ingredients of the oil, the anointing oil, that is a severe sin to make the anointing oil on your own. We said it's karas. Right? Tanar Rabbanan. Rabbi's taught in a brayso, Mafatim es Hashemen lilmoid by. If you make the ingredients of the oil, but because you're doing it for experimentation, you're learning how to do it. It's not for yourself. You wanted to give it to the community. You're pater. But lasach, you made it to actually anoint. Then you're chayiv. But listen to this: hasach mimenu is pater. But then if you go and use it, which is a prohibition to use the anointing oil on anything that's not meant for, you're exempt. Why? You only chayiv if it's the original one. Amar Mar, another one that Moshe Rabbeinu made. We just learned. The master taught Lil Maibai, or to give it to the community. You're exempt minalan. How do we know this? Asya maskunte min b'maskunte the Kereisos. It It says maskunte in its proportion, or in its ratio, or something. You have that there? Maskunte.
Here it says,
In its
and
proportion.
in its formula.
Oh, really? It's over here. It says proportions, formula. That's good. Uksiv legabi Kereisos, and regarding the Kereisos, so we're learning from the Kereisos now. It says by the Kereisos, leisasu lachem, don't make it for you. Lachem hu da'aser, you're not allowed to make it for personal use. Aval l'maisa d'tzibur pater. It has the word lachem there. Lachem is excluding if you're making it for the community. That seems to be an exemption. So gabi shemen nami l'maisa d'tzibur pater. Very good. So we learned from the oil to the Kereisos. By the way, the ketera, the oil has all of these types of keteras in it. It's not exactly the keteras, but it has spices in the oil. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, "V'tihad keteras v'neilach v'shemen." If you think that you can just make these comparisons, then you have to compare it the whole way. Ma shemen ki mefatim lechetzim pater, af keteras nami ki mefatim lechetzim pater. If you don't make the full amount by the oil, you're exempt. By the Kereisos, you should also be exempt. Alama Marava, why did Rabbi say that if you make half the amount of the Kereisos, you're chayev? Shemen shpit lachatzayin is pater. But the oil that you make half of it, you're exempt. In other words, this is if you make half the recipe, you have to divide all the everything in half, and you can make half the recipe. But if you make half the recipe for the Kereisos, you're chayev, and if you make half the recipe for the oil, you're pater. Now, if we just made a comparison, then the law should be the same. Amalach Rava explains, Gabi Shem Ksiv Maskunte Leisasu Kamayhu. There's an extra word there. You shall not make like it, which means in its full proportion, full amount. Kamayhu do asar v'chetz shaper dami Gabi Kereisos. But by the Kereisos, it's the Ksiv Kereisos Hashetase Kol Asiyah Kereisos. Efsher the Makter Pras B'Shachas Pras Ben Arbaim. However, you make the Kereisos because it's possible to offer half in the morning and half in the afternoon, and so therefore, half a recipe would also be chayiv. Tana Rabbanan, Rabbi started in the Bais. Shemen HaMishcha. The anointing oil. This is not complicated. It may look a little bit. It's not simple. Morderar is. It's just like the way the Torah learns Mordechai. It's a type of mirror. That's Heimeis. That's 500 shkalim. That's the weight, how much they used. Kida, I don't know what that is. They probably in arts will probably say kida.
A type of spice.
Another type of spice. Amin Gevix. Okay. It's Heimeis is also 500. Kinaman Baisem sounds like cinnamon. Yeah. His Heimeis is also 500. Uknei Baisem, another type of growth stick that has a smell. That's Chamishim Masayim. That's 250. So we had 500, 500, 500, and 250. The total is Nimtzukulam Elef V'Shiva Meis V'Chamishim, 1,750. Tana Minyana Kamash Malan. The Brisa is telling us how to count. It needs to tell me the number. I can count. So Tana Hakakashali. The Tana actually had a question. Ema Knei Baisim Kinaman Baisim. We should say that Knei Baisim is the same like Kinaman Baisim. Ma Kinaman Baisim Machtzisai B'Chamishim Masayim. Ma Knei Baisim Machtzisai Chamishim Masayim. Da'avalu Train Alafen. Maybe what it means to what I could have thought was that, you see, when you read this in the verse, it says 500, 500. Kinaman Baisem, Machtzisai Chamishim Masayim. Half of it is 250. Knei Baisem Chamishim Masayim. Knei Baisem is 250. I could have thought that was just a continuation of the half of it is 250, and really each one here is 500, and the total would be 2,000. Right? 4 items, each one 500 shkalim would be 2,000. So that's what I could have thought. So that's why it's telling me that no, it's 1,750, not 1,750, not 2,000. But maybe that's actually accurate. Maybe you're supposed to say that the last one is half of it is 250. So imkein nichtav kra kinaman baisim uknei baisim mechza umechza chamishim masayim. Then it should say them together and just put the total on there. That it's both of them, half of it is 250. Okay.
This is still someone just making it on his own?
No.
Now
we're talking about Nutan Rabbanan, the amounts in the Shem and Mishkan.
I just
And
want
we're
to go
talking
back.
about how much, if a person doesn't make the full amount, if he makes half a recipe, what happens then?
Just a side comment, sorry, sidebar. What we learned last night, and I'll leave it with you in case I'm saying it wrong, was that was talking about Shem and Mishka, which I believe the same thing we're talking about, that if you had not the real one, you weren't over Me'ila, which I thought was interesting because we learned about Me'ila before.
Right.
Because it's not really Kodesh.
Right. So we learned here that if you use the wrong one, that if you anoint with it, you're not chayev.
Yes, it's
only the original one of Moshe. Right. Amar layer of Papa la Abaya. Papa says to Abaya, Shu shekel. Now that you have to do two. What does it mean? Half of it is 250. That means you measure 250 and you throw it in. You measure 250 and you throw it in. You're using half cups. Your total is 500 when you say half of it is 250. So, but what it means is you have to measure it twice. So, kishu shekel behechru shekel ayin ba'ayinu shekel. Do you add a little bit to it, or do you, when you do the measuring, or do you do it exact? So it says, Amar Lei responds to him. Abaya responds to Rav Papa. This is very surprising. Abaya would be the teacher. This works. Abaya responds, Rachmana klasa bad bebad. The Torah says that you have to do it exact. And you think you should do estimation? V'amar Rav Yuda. The problem is